Thank you, Brian. A crucial vote in California over one school district's plan to require students starting in kindergarten to learn about gays, lesbians, and transgender people. The controversy plan is all part of the Alameda Unified School District's new curriculum to combat bullying. Griff Jenkins was there when the final decision happened. He joins us from San Francisco. Good morning to you, Griff.
Hey, Steve, good morning. You're right. The Alameda Unified Schools Board was voting on an addition to their current curriculum in an anti-bullying effort. It's called the LGBT, the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Lesson number 9. Now, passions were running high, excuse me, Steve, because they met to discuss it on May 12th, and it overflowed. People were yelling and shouting, and so they had to break it up, have a second meeting on May 18th, and then last night was the actual vote. People turned out. It was a little more than 50, about 60-40. Opponents are the 60. Now, what are they upset about? They're upset about the things in the curriculum that introduce these gay and lesbian elements. And what specifically opponents say they're upset about is that it's not age appropriate for K through 5. Now, before the vote occurred, there are 5 members on the board. One person chosen to speak, Pastor Dion Evans, gave his word. Here's what he had to say.
Action cannot, in this circumstance, be the product of political gaming, plantation politics, nor prejudice. If, in defiance of sound reason and fairness to all students and parents, this curriculum is adopted tonight, it will cause a strong reaction. Instead of bringing us together and healing divisions, it will cause even greater division, alienation, and suspicion.
Steve, opponents say that they see this as an effort to advance the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender lifestyle under the guise of an anti-bullying effort. Now, this all goes back to the California Safe Schools and Safe Student and Violence Prevention Act of 2000 that says that students cannot be discriminated against based on their gender identity, or sexual orientation. But in speaking to folks after, and the vote, of course, as you saw there, was 3-2. Talking to opponents last night, they said their next step is to try and get a recall of board members and bring it up again. And quickly, this book, which is introduced in the 2nd grade, and Tango Makes 3, is the story of 2 gay penguins that raise a young penguin, and that is going to be taught in the 2nd grade here as one of the materials if a recall doesn't happen based on the vote that occurred last night. Steve?
Okay. Same-sex penguins, only in California. All right, Griff Jenkins reporting live right now from San Francisco. Thank you, sir. Fox and Friends rolls on in 2 minutes. Right back.
Homosexual history lessons have been approved for California classrooms. Students as young as 7 will start learning about same-sex parents, and in 4th grade, they'll learn about gay rights activist and politician Harvey Milk. The State Board of Education unanimously approved the changes to the curriculum Thursday in response to the nation's first law requiring that schools incorporate gay history in their lessons. In addition to mandating that schools teach about gay leaders, the law also forbids presenting gays or the homosexual lifestyle in a negative light.
A major overhaul for history lessons in California public schools. Students will learn about the prominent roles that many gays and lesbians played in shaping America. The law to include LGBT history passed 4 years ago, but budget cuts and opposition stalled the plan. But this afternoon, the State Board of Education is moving to comply with the nation's first law and reviewed a curriculum outline. Discussions about diverse families would be introduced in 2nd grade. Then in 4th grade, students will learn about California's place in the gay rights movement. In 5th grade, 8th grade, and in high school, students will learn about gender roles in the 18th and 19th centuries and examples of individuals who flouted them.
In addition to mandating that schools teach about gay leaders, the law also forbids presenting gays or the homosexual lifestyle in a negative light.
Feel safe, especially in school, but this afternoon, one group of students says they feel anything but.
They say they feel isolated, ignored, and like teachers aren't doing enough to change that. So now, a solution, one that could affect your child's classroom or school in the coming months. And now Zan Kelly joins us from Monroe County to explain.
It's a problem that's likely an issue in high school hallways and classrooms across Indiana.
I know none of the teachers like wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go to school and make a child feel uncomfortable. But it accidentally happens anyway.
It makes it feel like you don't really have any allies in the school.
Teachers not knowing how to approach their LGBT students, how to address their sexual or gender identity, how to handle other students who may say inappropriate things. Those are the issues at the heart of what is going on right now inside this Bloomington church, where a group of teens, members of the Prism youth community, are meeting to help teachers help them. They're creating a guide, a training manual with everything educators need to know to make their classroom fully inclusive. One key topic, how teachers should really respond to uncomfortable situations.
Take for an example, one of the kids say, oh, that's so gay, and the teacher just says, everybody quiet. And so instead of addressing the issue, the teacher kind of shuts down the conversation. And so the student who says that's so gay doesn't understand that what they said could potentially make school unsafe for another student.
Feeling unsafe, feeling isolated, it's what they say contributes to a higher suicide rate among LGBT students. A tough reality that won't be solved overnight, but here in this Bloomington church today, a first step forward. Reporting for the Now Indy, Ann Kelly, RTV6.
That educational guide for teachers should be done in the coming months. The Prism youth community tells us ideally by this fall it will be in the hands of anyone who interacts with students in Monroe County community middle and high schools.
In debate tonight in Thousand Oaks, the school board there will talk about whether to teach children about the accomplishments of the LGBT community in the classroom.
Well, parents have a lot to say about the issue. CBS 2's Christine Lazar shows us an email by the board president that has a lot of people talking.
This email sent by a local school board president is at the center of a debate over how much kids should learn about the LGBT community in public schools.
We can talk about those people without necessarily that aspect of their life.
With parents weighing in on both sides of the issue.
It's basically meant to rectify what hasn't been an inclusive history.
Jess Wyhe is a mom and a blogger who lives in Thousand Oaks. She posted the email from Conejo Valley School Board President Mike Dunn to her Anonymous Mommy Facebook page. Dunn was responding to a parent who was questioning his perceived hesitation regarding the FAIR Act. It's a state law which compels public schools to teach the contributions of people with disabilities and those within the LGBT community. Dunn responded by writing in part, "If I ignore my Christian beliefs, what happens to my soul when I die? Where I spend eternity is far more important to me than being a school board trustee."
I respect everybody's right to have their own faith and their own morals and to teach their children what they feel is appropriate, but I do think that religion and education should be separate.
Board member Betsy Connolly addressed the controversy on her Facebook page, telling her followers, if we only tell the typical story, where does that leave the 7-year-old who has 2 dads, or whose mom is a firefighter or dad is a nurse or in a wheelchair? I think it leaves them feeling at best invisible, at worst shamed. But this mom of 4 thinks Dunn's email has been blown out of proportion.
I don't believe that he has imposed God on anyone. I believe that what he's done is just said that I'm led by my faith, and that makes my decisions.
I emailed, called, and even knocked on Mike Dunn's door, but he has not responded to my request for comment. In Thousand Oaks, I'm Christine Lazar, CBS 2 News.
You know, in Loveline over the years, I've talked to many young people with particular people who have certain religious orientations, will reserve their virginity for that kind of behavior, and it's really problematic. Did you get into any of that?
Okay, so the way that we talk about sex, sexuality, and sexual practices at Harvard Sex Education is a student-run initiative, and I do want to be clear about that. We do involve a lot of clinicians. We have Planned Parenthood come and talk to us. We always have the Alliance on Teen Pregnancy work with us, and we work with our University Health Services, our office that works against sexual assault and violence prevention. And we work with all of the different counseling groups that also work on our campus and all our mental health services.
Okay, I'm feeling just FYI, if I could say, I'm feeling a lot better about this whole thing.
It sounds very sex positive.
Well, not just sex positive, but the nuances are being explored, the clinical realities are being explored, and then again, the sexual aggression against women is so massive on campus now. You can't, the fact that you're getting into that, again, hats off. My question to you, though, is what kind of criticism have you been getting and how have you been responding?
Exactly.
So We've been responding to a lot of the criticism that's been coming in because I think it's been very singular and focused on this idea that the what, and the but workshop is the only workshop that's being run or the only class that's been given, and people are not looking at Harvard Sex Week as a holistic enterprise that takes place over this week and involves a variety of different discussions of different forms of sexual decision-making. And what Harvard Sex Week is here to do is to open the dialogue on sex, sexuality, and intimacy on our campus and talk about sex and sexual practices in a way that doesn't condone any one type of sexual decision-making, but just emphasizes that all of it needs to be thought of with regard to consent, to your own needs, to your partner's needs, if you have a potential partner, and if you don't, that's fine also. But all of it needs to be done in a way that is consensual and that we're constantly thinking about health and
No, Corinne, you're awesome. You're so well spoken and you're intelligent and everything. But come on, you named it. You knew that people were gonna like kind of be up in arms with that name. What in the butt? It could have just been called like anal sex, and I think that wouldn't even get as much as what in the butt. So like I think you guys sort of kind of named it, knowing it was gonna get a lot of attention.
Sort of follow that not only in terms of getting attention, but maybe they had wanted to get the kids in the door to to do something provocative to get this discussion going. What do you say?
Absolutely, absolutely. I would say that there are definitely a few things about Sex Week that are very intentionally provocative because we do want to bring people into the door, we want to bring people into the room, and we want people to be excited to talk about this and to not be ashamed to talk about sex and sexuality. Because I think one of my worst fears for college campuses is that sex is something that's only talked about in a shameful way. People go out and they seek it either online or in dark places or at parties, and that's how a lot of the sexual aggression on our campus happens. That's how a lot of sexual violence takes place, and people aren't willing to have frank and open discussions about why this is happening. I do not want the students on my campus to be getting all the information they get about anal sex from violent, aggressive porn, which is a lot of us out there.
CBS has reported that plans for updated sex education curriculum at a South Bay school district had parents protesting at a local board meeting Tuesday night. CBS San Francisco reports that Cupertino Union School District board members voted 2-2 on the changes, which needed a majority to pass. The issue for many parents was the graphic nature of the material and how far is too far when it comes to sex ed in middle school. The proposed curriculum included descriptions of vaginal, oral, and anal sex, along with material on homosexuality.
Prominent gay figures in history could soon play a bigger role in California classrooms. The Fair Education Act is heading to Governor Jerry Brown's desk after the state assembly passed the bill on Tuesday. Now, if enacted, the law would take in effect in January, requiring schools to teach all grade levels of the historical contributions of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. Joining me live from San Francisco is Professor Ardell Thomas, Chair of LGBT Studies at City College of San Francisco. Thank you for being here today, Ardell. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Richard.
Why is this so important?
Well, it's important because as much complexity as we can bring to history is important, like the biggest picture possible for students. I think we've seen this when women's history had been left out, women's accomplishments, people of color, and now this new measure will ensure that LGBT people, as well as people with disabilities, will be covered in history books.
Why do you support it? And as we look at this legislation, you have given me some idea of what the main purpose behind it and what it is for, but might it make it also stand out too much? Set it aside.
Well, I have an example that I could give you. When I'm teaching my classes, on the first day I will ask, how many people have heard of Dr. Martin Luther King? And everybody in the classroom raises their hands, including students who've only been in the United States 2 weeks. And then I ask, and how many of you have heard of Bayard Rustin? And I get, out of a class of 45 students, maybe 2 or 3. He was actually Martin Luther King's right-hand man in many ways during the Civil Rights Movement, but particularly he was the organizer of the 1963 March on Washington and is pictured with Dr. King. When you see the famous I Have a Dream speech, he is in the photo towards the left-hand side of Dr. King. And he's incredibly important because during the Civil Rights Movement and the African American leaders of the Civil Rights Movement discussing how can we make the biggest impact for this March on Washington, they discussed Bayard Rustin, and they discussed his being gay. He was out of the closet. And they knew that, in particular, white conservatives were going to use homophobic tactics to try and say, let's, to scare the African-American civil rights leaders into not using Bayard Rustin to organize it. And the African-American civil rights community had deep discussions about this and decided, no, we need the best person for this job, and it's Bayard Rustin. And
so they stood up for him, and they continued to
absolutely
have him part of it. I want to move on to something else, and that's an important story that you do bring up. Some critics, since you were mentioning that, Concerned Women for America say that this required curriculum might confuse children. What do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, that we don't give children nearly enough credit for their intellectual capacities at school. And I think that many of these arguments may also have been used when looking at, what are the deeper complexities of, say, Native American history in this country. We've often had, the Thanksgiving story, and I think there was concern, well, should we make it more complicated? And in order for us to really understand our history and where we've been and where we're going, as much of a full picture as possible is what we need to give our children. They'll be able to decide what seems important to them and what doesn't over time. It also will give families an opportunity to discuss the rich history of all peoples that we have in the United States.
Ardell Thomas, thank you so much. Have a very good day.
Thank you.
See-through sequin dress, body gyrating. You might think you're at a nightclub. Not nearly. This is the 2017 Learning Expo for Community School District 4. Essentially an evening talent show for elementary and middle school students of East Harlem. This performance was listed in the program as a special surprise.
It was more than a surprise. I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Concerned mom Raquel Morales was at the show with her 10-year-old. She says the impersonation of Iris Chacon, a Puerto Rican icon, danced and dragged by PS94 PTA President Frankie Quinones, was completely inappropriate for children's eyes, a disservice to the kids and community.
What was the most shocking part of this performance? Seeing him get on all fours, legs wide open, spread out for all to see. Did you see people leaving? Oh, a lot of people left.
She says once the content got raunchy, the superintendent should have stepped in and closed the curtain.
We reached out to the Department of Ed, and they tell us the content of the show was inappropriate, and a school administrator has spoken to Mr. Quinones.
Quinones did not return our calls.
Was just hoping for a quick comment on the talent show.
Sometimes people tend to take things a little too far, especially when you're dealing with children.
Barksdale says she would have raced her kids out of the room.
Oh my gosh, cover their eyes, ears, everything.
Mother of two, Yvette Bonilla, was in the audience, says the show was amazing.
The performance was spot on, spot on. He did everything like Iris Chacon would have done.
Was it okay in this environment?
I think they've seen a lot worse.
Have they? From East Harlem, Vanessa Murdoch, CBS 2 News.
A spokesperson for the Department of Education also tells us that Mr. Quinones has served the maximum number of terms permitted by PTA president. The school will host an election later this month to select a new one.
And Dan, school teachers now being trained on how they will teach this subject in the classroom. This as state educators consider how the history will be portrayed in school books. Come next school year, students will get a history lesson on the evolution, the struggles, and the contributions of the gay, lesbian, and transgender community.
I think now that our history books are outdated and we don't have enough information about stuff going on in our modern day era, I totally can agree they should add that to new history books in the future.
And I think putting it in the history book, talking about it being suppressed and talking about it now would open it up for everyone. Everyone would accept it, and I think that's how it should be.
Last year, the State Board of Education approved the new History and Social Studies curriculum, many hoping the history lesson will lead to more tolerance, acceptance, and less bullying of students who identify with the LGBTQ community.
Instead of them being so ignorant and bullying other people about what they don't know about the LGBT community, it will give them that voice so that people are informed.
Yeah, a lot of people, I feel like if they aren't tolerant, it's just because they don't know anything about it and just know what their parents told them or what their church told them or just what they they don't know much about it, and tolerance will be built the more people are educated.
At the state capitol Thursday, educators heard comments on how the history of the LGBT community should play out in textbooks. And Wednesday, high school teachers in the Salinas Union High School District attended an all-day training session to learn more on how the subject should be taught in the classroom.
They've also taught about how to implement it. It's not advocating a lifestyle, just like we don't promote religion in public school. It's about teaching an extension of the civil rights movement is basically the approach. It's part of our society now. We need to face it, we need to own it, and we're doing it.
And some school teachers in the Salinas Unified High School District already being encouraged to try and deliver a lesson plan regarding this subject over the next coming months. And again, this curriculum will be fully implemented by next summer. Dan, Aaron.
Thank you very much, Felix. It was 2011 when Governor Brown signed into law the Fair Education Act that requires instruction on the contributions of minority groups, including the LGBT community.
At a Minneapolis private school are doubling down, saying they fully support a student field trip to an adult sex store.
But that is not sitting well with one parent who pulled his kids from that school and says this is a criminal matter. Fox 9's Jonathan Cho live in Minneapolis now with the latest on these developments. Jonathan?
Yeah, Amy, after pulling his 3 children from the school last week, this dad filed a complaint with Minneapolis police today, accusing some of the school leaders of exposing minors to pornographic material. And he's now considering his legal options. Lynn Floyd says he enrolled his children into Gaia Democratic School because of its emphasis on academic freedom and student-led instruction.
Wanted our children to grow up and remain children as long as possible.
But says he never imagined that would include a first-hand look at sex toys and risque material.
I don't see how it can continue, how she should be allowed to lead children in this manner.
Last week, Floyd says the school's sex education teacher, Starry Hedges, took about a dozen middle school and high school students on a field trip to an adult sex store called the Smitten Kitten in Uptown. After his 13 and 11-year-old daughters came home, they shared what they saw. Floyd immediately pulled them out of Gaia, including his 3-year-old daughter, and says the school did not give him any notice about the field trip.
All you had to do was ask us. This whole situation would have went a completely different way.
Ms. Hedges is also the private school's director, and when we tried to get her side of the story, her staff kicked us off the school grounds. Do you have any thoughts on this visit to the Smitten Kitten?
On our property, do I need to call the police?
No, not at all. We'll
Then
leave.
please.
In a letter posted to Gaia's website, the school board says it stands behind the field trip and views it as a legitimate learning experience that relates directly to topics covered during a year-long sexual health class. They also said participants communicated to us that the trip was a positive education experience. No student was required to attend. The owner of the Smitten Kitten said in a statement, the store is a resource for sound science-based sex ed information and leaves it up to parents and guardians to use their discretion when seeking resources.
They're certainly not going back to that school.
Floyd says his daughters are still traumatized and is waiting for an apology.
I want justice.
Now, a Minneapolis zoning inspector visited the Smitten Kitten this week because the students were inside and found some sexually explicit material that should have been covered up for minors. The store got a warning, and the clerk now says all of this has been taken care of.
We know many things are
about an issue taking center stage at the state capitol. One side says a new policy at school is meant to keep kids safe.
The other side says it's downright immoral. 7 Action News reporter Kim Russo takes us into the heart of this culture war.
The State Board of Education meeting started at 12:30 and it's expected to go until 6:30 as hundreds of people lined up to make public comment. There's a lot of anger, fear, and passion.
Isabel Fessler is only 13 years old, but she found the courage to speak out about how hard school can be.
I am bullied every day.
Why? Because she shows support for her friends.
For wearing a rainbow button on my backpack.
Isabel says the drafted board policy makes a statement. All kids are accepted in Michigan public schools. Taking a look at what the policy does, it calls on school staff to learn tolerance for LGBTQ kids ensure kids aren't bullied, and respect gender identity. It says school staff should call kids by their preferred pronoun and name without requiring parental permission. Many focused on the fact the policy would call on schools to allow students to use the restroom that matches their gender identity.
When I have my daughter coming to me, asking me why they want the boys to use the same restroom as her, it's a very hard subject for me to discuss.
Parents raised concerns about safety. Pastors raised concerns about morals.
And Jesus Christ made male and female. Nobody has to accept that. But that's what I believe is the truth.
It is a debate in which there seems to be no middle ground. Is gender simple, defined by God, or sometimes more complicated? One transgender man says he told his parents he was a boy when he was only 5 years old. He says it isn't a matter of right or wrong. He is who he is.
And we have our own ideas and perceptions of what gender is and what gender is not, when actually gender is really complicated. And if we can just listen to one another, we would get a lot further.
The Board of Education isn't going to vote today on this policy. Public comment is still open online. There's a link at our website, wxyz.com. In Lansing, Kim Russell, 7 Action News.
To talk more about this controversial subject, Andrea, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
First of all, tell us about this curriculum and the motivation behind it.
Well, it's interesting. The school board voted earlier in May to add gender identity. It's not a part of the state law. It's not a part of the state school board instruction, but they've decided to add it against the will of many of the parents. And so now what we're dealing with is a vote on the family life education. Now, while we're talking specifically about Fairfax, I think it's important for people to understand this is happening across the country. So I may talk about Virginia, but listen carefully for your own community.
Wow. Well, how will this curriculum impact the students?
Well, it's very interesting. Right now, what will happen is, starting in kindergarten, they'll talk to them about same-sex or gay marriage. And the parents will not be able to opt out. One of the big issues is in Virginia, parents can opt their children out of certain parts of the, quote, family life education. And so now what they're doing is they're trying to move parts of it from FLE, family life education, to health, which means the parents cannot opt their children out. And so we've been poring over the regulations and the information to see exactly what's happening. But we are very, very concerned that they are doing it here in Fairfax County and perhaps other places without the parents' knowledge or consent. In 8th grade, they will be discussing, let me just say, Bill Clinton's activity along with anal. In 8th grade, and most people, and they've lowered it from 9th grade, or teaching 4th graders about the word incest. How far does that go?
What is the difference between sexual orientation and and gender identity?
Well, the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity is sexual orientation is who you have sex with and how you have sex. Gender identity is who you are, male, female. Are you born male or female? Are you born nothing? And they want to break down those definitions so you're no longer male or female as God created us. You're